got solving with square roots. If I can get in a color that'll show up. Solve with, I'm going to call them radicals. We know that that's just a square root, right? Right, Miss McGee? That's right.
Yes, Miss McGee.
All right. We've talked a lot about solving equations, specifically linear equations, but today we're going to get into quadratic equations. So I guess before I show you how to solve quadratic equations, you need to know what a quadratic equation is. No, I'm not going to sing a song. What's a quadratic equation? What does it mean to be a quadratic? What's the difference in a quadratic and a linear equation? That's what you would think because of quad, right? But that's not that. A quadratic has an exponent of 2 on x. Okay? Whereas linear, you know, is just mx plus b or ax plus by. This one, standard form of a quadratic looks like this. Ax squared plus bx plus c. And so here, remember, these are coefficients. Those are going to be numbers that are going to go in and change to make it a quadratic. And you don't have to have every single one, but you have to have that x squared in it to make it a quadratic, right? And that's got to be the biggest exponent is the x squared. So examples of a quadratic may be y equals 3x squared plus 5. What's a in that equation? 3. What's b? 0. It's not there. B has an x hooked to it. And what is c? 5. See how they don't all have to be there? Have some of them and not all of them? You remember it now? Yeah, we got to do a lot of stuff with it. Today will be pretty easy. What color have I not used? The zeros? Yeah, you did. And we're going to do all that. We're going to review all that. Make sure you remember. All right, so sometimes we'll have to solve an equation that is a quadratic, and maybe it looks something like, by the way, it can look like, let me show you this too. That is still a quadratic y. If I multiplied that out, x minus 5 times x minus 5, because you can't distribute. Never, never, never distribute that squared through because you're subtracting in there. But if I foiled that out and distributed the 2 in front, I'd still have an x squared term, so it's still a quadratic. Okay? All right, so when we solve quadratics, solving quadratics. Let's say I have, let's do an easy one, 2x squared let's make it 4x squared. I know. Come on. Why is it still doing that? Just erasing. 4x squared equals 25. Now here's the key. If you ever, I don't care what kind of equation it is, if you see x written one time in the equation, like here, every time you see x one time, you can SAD map your way out of it. Only one. It doesn't matter if there are exponents hooked to it. It doesn't matter. If there's only one x, always, always, always SAD map. So in this case, what do I do first to get x by itself? You've got to divide 4. I don't do the exponent first because if I did the exponent first, I'd be going out of order here, right? There's no addition, subtraction. I do multiplication, division. So now I have x squared equals 25 over 4. So that's exactly right. You have to do the opposite. So now you have to kind of think about it. What's the opposite operation In other words, what cancels out a power of 2? Jackson said square root, and he's absolutely right. This cancels this out completely. Okay, so if I do it to one side, I got to do it to the other. Now I'm going to throw something in front of here. Does anybody know what? Remember doing that? Plus or minus? So you can have the positive or the negative. What's the square root of 25 over 4? 5 over 2. So understand this has two answers, right? It's positive 5 over 2 or negative 5 over 2. Does that make sense? Okay, let's kick it up a notch then. How many x's do you see in the equation? How many x's do you see? How many times do you see x written in the equation? 1. So what do I do? Side map. What comes first? Because 2x minus 1 is in parentheses. And in side map, what comes last? Parentheses. So what do I do first? Use square root. That's exactly right. This goes away. So I have 2x minus 1 equals what? Equals what? How about plus or minus 3? Why is that important? Because it gives me two answers, okay? And here's what you're going to have to do with these two answers. You're going to have to say, okay, that means 2x minus 1 equals 3. So we didn't have to split it up like this on the last one because if you go back and look, there wasn't anything else to do after you took the square root, right? I took the square root and I was done. But here, it's not done. I'm not done solving it yet. So I need to split it up into the two answers, the positive and the negative version, because I need to find out those two different answers. Y'all remember doing this?
Yeah.
Okay. Now solve each one individually. How do I solve the first one? You add 1 and then divide 2. So one of the answers is going to be 2. Close. Solve it out. It's going to be a little bit different. Add 1. And, yep. Two answers. Yep. Every one of these should have two answers. What about come on. I do too. I see X too many times. So I know I can't start side mapping, right? What do you notice about the X's that you see, though? They're like terms. Could I combine them, maybe? Maybe I could. Let's see. Which one should I move? The negative one? Add it to both sides. I saw many people, which I haven't gotten to y'all's test, so I'm just judging this strictly on 4th block. Y'all may not have done this. A lot of people are still adding in the wrong place and subtracting in the wrong place. You can't do things on the same side. You have to make sure it's 1 on both sides whenever you do it. In other words, I couldn't do 2x squared plus 2x squared on the same side here, even if there was another x squared. I just talked in circles there, and I can tell y'all didn't. We're just going to keep going. Okay, 2x squareds are gone. 2x squared plus 2x squared is what? 4x squared. So I've got 4x squared minus 8 equals 6. Now can I side map it? Why? I have 1x there. Does everybody see that? I'm down to 1x. It might be an x squared, but it's only written one time. So I'm going to go ahead and side map my way out of it. What do I do first? Add 8. All right, over here. So you have your notes. Side map. This was like terms. All right, so I have 4x squared equals 14, right? What now? Divide by 4. I'm going to leave it like this just for a minute so that whenever I come through and take the square root now, when you're dividing or you're multiplying inside under the radical, you can do them separately. So I can get the square root of 14 over what? 2. Plus or minus there because it's 2 answers. Tell me what you think. You try this one, tell me what you get. Okay. Tell me what you did first while you're finishing up. That's what I did first. What Jackson said. Why did we divide by 4 first before we took the square root? Because this is parentheses, inside parentheses comes last, right? And multiplication division comes before we take care of exponents. Okay? Now, if you square rooted first and you change that to 2 times x plus 1 equals square root of 18, that's okay. You didn't do that either? Okay. It's best just to divide by 4 first. And so I end up with x plus 1 squared equals 18 over 4. Now I can move into the square root. Because the square root is an exponent, I have the square root of 18 over what? 2. Here's my plus or minus. Yes? The plus or minus happens as soon as you take the square root. Everybody okay on that so far? Still not by itself. Subtract 1. Now, when you subtract 1, I get x equals, because this is not an exact number, I'm not going to simplify it any more than to say negative 1 plus the square root of 18 over 2 and negative 1 minus the square root of 18 over 2. So when I split them, I'm just going to leave them that way. Am I done with that problem? What's the problem with the way it's written right now? There's one little problem with the way the answer is written. Now I'm really going to make you think back to Algebra 2. The problem's coming in with this. Does anybody know what that is? Do y'all remember simplifying radicals? Where you took a radical and you said, can I divide it by a perfect square? What perfect square can I divide 18 by? That's not perfect square. 9, right? What times 9 is 18? 2. So then I can split these up. Square root of 9 and square root of 2. And the square root of 9 is... Y'all remember doing that? So this actually becomes negative 1 plus 3 times the square root of 2 over 2. It looks worse than it is. Negative 1 minus. Goodness, I can't write this morning. Whenever it's like this, no, I don't mind if you leave it plus or minus. But if it's a whole number and you can combine them, you need to combine it into the two separate answers. Other questions about that? Do y'all need to see another example on simplifying that radical like that?
No.
Are you sure? I feel like some of you don't remember that. Simplify that radical. All right, tell me what you got. That's exactly right. You broke it up. What perfect square did you use? 25. So you got 5 times the square root of 3 plus or minus. One more little thing about radicals before I set you loose. What if I end up with something like this? What is the problem with that? You cannot have a radical in the bottom. So the question is, what do I do about it? Erase it? No. Can't just erase it. What can I do? You can't break it down. So what can you do? What would make this go away? You're right. If I squared it, right? But just because I square the bottom, squaring the bottom and squaring the top, that's doing two different things, top and bottom. Do you see why? If I square the bottom, then I'm multiplying the bottom by what? Itself, right? But if I square the top, then I've multiplied the top by square root of 3 and not square root of 2, so I've changed the value of the fraction. So instead, so you're on the right wavelength, thinking that whenever you square it, the radical goes away. But whatever you multiply to the bottom, you have to also multiply to the top. So you can't just square the bottom and square the top. You have to multiply by the same thing. So we're going to multiply top and bottom by the bottom. So what happens up top? What comes at the top? What's the square root of 3 times the square root of 2? That's right. Oh, I thought it wasn't going. Square root of 6. That's exactly right. How about this? The bottom. 2. Just a quick little recap from Algebra 2. Y'all look like I have talked enough. I look like I'm losing you at this point.